Welcome to MamaFuel, the podcast that fuels every mama's heart, soul, mind, and body, and hopefully sparks a few dreams along the way. I'm Ann Ferguson, Chief Nurturer and Mama Mentor at the Centered Mama Project, and your host for this podcast. I'll be sharing real, raw, and often funny conversations with beautiful mamas from around the world to remind you that you're not alone and that you're doing amazingly on this wild journey of shepherding small humans as they make their way on our beautiful planet. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of MamaFuel, the podcast. I'm Ann Ferguson, your host, and this week is a special episode for a number of reasons. It is episode number 45, which is a number that's particularly speaking to me right now because I just turned 45 a smidgen over a week ago, and I'm celebrating that this podcast has reached the same milestone because not so long ago, it was but a glimmer of hope in my mind, and I'm thrilled and very, very proud of MamaFuel and all the conversations that I have shared with you, but also that have been prompted as a result of what you hear and what you exchange and we exchange here on MamaFuel. So thank you for listening. If you are a first-time listener, welcome. If you are a return listener, I am so grateful for you being here and downloading the podcast and listening to it and sharing it. And as a 45th birthday present to me, I would love, if you haven't yet, for you to leave a review and a rating on iTunes. The more positive reviews there are on iTunes, the more the podcast will be shared by the algorithm that runs the whole show. And so many mamas have been saying to me of late that the conversations that we have here are reaching them to the very core of their souls. I have had people messaging me to tell me that they've been sobbing while running because they recognize themselves in the conversation that they're listening to. Other mamas messaging me and saying, I thought I was the only one. Others messaging me and saying, I'm so glad to hear from older mamas who have children who've already left home, and it gives me hope and it reminds me that I maybe want to do things differently because I don't want to end up in the same situations that some of them have faced. So let's share. Let's share. That is my wish for this 45th, mark this 45th turn around the sun, and I would love your support in doing that. The other reason that this episode is particularly special to me is that this, at time of recording, is the last day of Global Maternal Mental Health Week. And it was the first week of May, 2019, at time of recording. And a whole lot of conversation was going on this week online about maternal mental health. And women are becoming braver and braver about talking about their experiences of mental health around pregnancy and motherhood. And it's great. It's amazing. And I'm super supportive of all of it. In fact, I participate. However, I also know that it needs to happen even more. And the stigma that's around mental health for all people, but in this case, I'm particularly addressing the stigma for mothers, needs to go. And the sooner we can stop feeling like mental health issues, mental illness is a sign of weakness or something to be ashamed of, the sooner we'll start getting help, the sooner we'll normalize it, and the sooner we'll be able to support mamas. The reality is there are mamas who are struggling silently all over the world, in all financial realms of our existence, in all educational realms, in all countries, elevations, all of it. We're all the same. Really, we are. We all experience hormonal changes when we become mothers. We experience so much in our bodies and our minds. Research has been done, finally, around maternal post-traumatic stress disorder, which has often been misdiagnosed as depression. There are a lot of advances happening, and I'm thrilled to be reading about it. The reason that I'm so thrilled to be reading about all of this communication and these conversations is that mental health has been a bit of a struggle for me at different points of my mothering journey. And if you've been listening to the podcast for any length of time, you'll notice that it's a bit of a red thread that runs through a lot of the episodes. That's because mental health challenges and mental illness happen to so many more mothers than we think they do. And again, there is no shame. There is no shame for someone who has cancer, so why should there be shame for someone who has experienced or is living with mental illness or distress? So many of us feel distress and are told to be grateful that we have healthy babies, or to be thankful that at least our children are ABC when other children are something different. And I really want to take this opportunity of this 45th episode of MamaFuel to say to you, if you're listening to this and you are in distress and you are feeling fragile, you are not weak. You are not alone. It's not just you. I'd like to tell you the story in a bit more detail of my mental health journey over the past 12 years since I became a mama. And to do that, I'm going to share something that I wrote in a post on Facebook in a group of international mothers who live here in Switzerland, many of whom, being international dwellers, are really struggling. And it's not because they're living in Switzerland, it's because they're living away from the people and places and systems and structures that they know, grew up with, and have within them in ways that they don't even think about. They know at home how banks work, how traffic works, how parking tickets work, how the grocery stores are organized, and where to go get the things that you need. And when you come to a different country, even if you've been there a long time, you have all of those things suddenly that you don't know, plus language or languages that you don't speak, plus all of the cultural unspokens that are so powerful and have such an influence on quality of life. But it's not just mamas who are living far away from the people and places that they come from. When I first started on this MamaFuel journey, I thought that my mission was to support women who were living very, very far from home, far from the people and places that were familiar to them their whole lives. But it quickly transpired in conversations with mothers from all over the place that it actually was a universal. It wasn't a unique, it was a universal experience amongst mothers. A dear friend of mine who lives in London told me the story that she was living on a particular street and she moved a mile up the road, so 2.5 kilometers up the same road. And that move and the subsequent birth of her second child meant that suddenly she had a newborn and a toddler to put in pushchairs or in car seats to drive to another part of the city. And it meant that suddenly she was in the city she'd grown up in her whole life, yet felt incredibly isolated despite being very social, which doesn't really change anything. But despite being very social, despite being in the city of her birth, despite being still close to family and friends, she suddenly didn't see them as much because all of the things that were at hand where she used to live, all of the habits, all of the things that she could do without thinking too much about it, suddenly she couldn't. And the other people who were also having little babies and who maybe also had multiple children at a very young age also were loath to pile them into cars or onto public transport if it existed, or into pushchairs and struggle on the pavements to try to make sure that they could get past with all the people and the deliveries and all of the other things that are challenging. And if you've had multiple kids, and even if you have one, you know, and you do because you're listening to this podcast, but you know how it can be really hard to just get out of the house. And that is magnified for people who have any kind of challenge, be it a baby with a skin condition that makes it uncomfortable for that little one and they cry all the time. I'm reading Kate Northrup's book right now, Do Less. And in it, she describes how Penelope, her first daughter, had some really, really bad skin problems and was crying and screaming all the time. And she describes her anguish and her sleeplessness and her inability to see beyond the suffering of her baby and how it was really incredibly distressing for her, and she struggled to ask for and then to accept help. It's really helpful when people with a very high profile like Kate Northrup are talking about that kind of thing. And if you don't know Kate Northrup, I urge you to go and look her up. She's fantastic, and I'm excited to say that she will be a podcast guest on MamaFuel in the coming months. But it's been really refreshing to read her book, Do Less, which, as the title suggests, is urging us, particularly all women, but we mothers particularly, to do less so that we live more fulfilling and richer lives in a healthier state of mind. So I wanted to share what I had put into this group because there was a cry for help late last week from a mama, and it really prompted me to shift out of thinking about doing what I'm now doing and actually doing it. It was Global Maternal Mental Health Week this week. You might have seen the hashtag MMH Week 2019 or the hashtag Making Over Motherhood. They were doing the rounds, and thank goodness, we need to talk. I didn't actually know about this special week, but as someone who is always a mental powerhouse until motherhood, this really matters to me. A lot. And I know it matters to a lot of you listening, because I would wager that most of you have at least had moments where you wobbled, most likely have had moments where you've wondered if you're actually literally losing your mind, even if it's from sleeplessness. And a lot of you will have faced moments of real mental illness, real in the sense of diagnosable, treatable, life-impacting mental illness. When my first daughter was born, I went into shock. I'd had a gynecological surgery when I was 13, had received no therapy, no psychological support. It was an emergency surgery. The cancer word was uttered, and within 48 hours, I was having a mass removed, which fortunately wasn't cancerous, but really turned my life and my plans and my schooling that I was about to start upside down. I was 13, I was healthy, I was back up on my feet in no time and back to school, and never really thought about it again until my daughter was born. I went into shock because I think everything that had happened when I was 13, 20 years earlier came crashing on top of me to be processed and to be healed. My daughter and I never had skin-to-skin contact when she was born. They took her away and kept her away from me for hours. I spent the first week of her life, this little baby that I had dreamt of my entire life. I knew I would have a girl. I wanted so badly for us to have a natural birth, for her to be on me from the moment she was born, for us to bond, and it didn't happen. I spent the first week of her life certain that I was completely failing her and thinking that I was slipping into a bottomless pit of darkness while trying to recover from an emergency C-section. I can't describe those first few days in the hospital, other than to say that I had many people coming in looking confused because physically I was fine. The only explanation one person gave to me was that it must be my hormones that were going a little bit crazy, but they'd all level out in a few days and I'd be fine. Except I wasn't. Until the day that a friend of mine came to visit, and she decided to take me outside of the hospital. At this point, I'd been in the hospital with windows that wouldn't open, seeing only my husband, who was being incredible with our baby girl, and my failure at giving her the right welcome, as I saw it, into this world. I couldn't see that she had been born safely. I couldn't see that she was healthy. All I could see was that it hadn't gone anything like I'd hoped. I had failed her. And not only that, but she was losing weight because my hormones, my body hadn't caught up with the C-section, and I hadn't started producing milk. The day that they came to start supplementing her with formula, thank goodness, felt like the absolute rock bottom moment for me, because I couldn't give her the birth that I was certain she should have had. And I also couldn't feed her. And if it was up to my body, she wouldn't be alive, is how my thinking went. Thankfully, that day, my friend Mary came to see me, and her husband and my husband sat in our hospital room with our beautiful baby girl, who was perfectly happy and gaining weight. And she took me outside to sit under the palm trees in Barcelona. I tried to explain to her how I was feeling, this new friend who didn't have any children of her own. And she told me the story of her father's recent death, and how, when she was grieving him, these immense waves of grief would come crashing down on her, making it almost impossible for her to breathe. Definitely impossible for her to function as she normally would. Almost impossible to live. But that day, sitting in the sun under the palm trees, Mary said to me that the reason she was sitting next to me and the reason she understood what was going on was because she realized one day that every single one of those waves passed. And that on the other side, her heart was still beating, her breath was still coming in and out of her body, and she was okay. She'd made it through. On some level, I'm pretty sure that day Mary saved my life. At least that's how it felt to me at the time. I was able to hobble very slowly back into the hospital room. My daughter and I found a rhythm. My milk came in, and everything started to tick along until we got home. It took months to feel better. Months of panic attacks. Months of being terrified to leave my apartment, convinced that the 375 million scooters that seemed to be waiting with engines revving at every intersection were only there to mow down my child in her stroller. In fact, most of the time I wore her on my chest with my fingers in her hands, not wanting any of the strangers to shove their fingers into her little mitts or touch her face, and so afraid that somehow her pushchair would go into the street and I wouldn't be able to save her from those horrific scooters as I saw them at the time. Eventually, I started trusting my legs to walk us out into the world without feeling as much like she might die or be kidnapped if I fainted. And I often felt like I would faint because of infection, following the C-section, because of general weakness. It wasn't fun. And it was very confusing to me as a person whose mind had been her main tool or weapon even in life until that point. It was very confusing to feel that my mind was no longer my ally. And it's not that it wasn't my ally, it just wasn't well. I couldn't expect my body, if I had the flu, to function like it always would. And yet I wanted my mind to function like it always had, very efficiently, very sharply, very critically of myself above all else. And I just couldn't get it online. I couldn't get it to stop being terrified of everything. I couldn't get it to be reasonable, in air quotes. I couldn't get it to toe the line because my mind was ill. I wasn't okay. But the thing is, nobody knew. We had this incredible woman named Florita coming in to stay with us for 4 hours a day. And I swear to God, she was my second angel. She came into my apartment every single day for 4 hours. And she would say to me, "Go to bed, Mama." And I would fret. I would go into my room and I would sit on my bed, rocking back and forth, unable to sleep because I was so convinced that my daughter would need me. And I wouldn't let her leave the apartment. So this incredible woman who had raised children of her own and many children of other people because she had been a nanny and a carer and a governess in a school. She's incredible and is still one of our grannies for our kids. She was in the apartment, and yet I, with my zero experience, was convinced that if I went to sleep and something happened to my daughter, it would be my fault. Somehow Florita managed to get me to sleep a little bit. Eventually, I started going to the gym when she was there. We'd go out together into the street, her taking me for a walk just as much as she was taking my daughter. And slowly, little by little, my body and my mind started to heal. Thankfully, within a year of my daughter's birth, we moved to Geneva, a place where I speak the language, and also a place where I hadn't lived such a terrifying trauma. My world started righting itself. But honestly, it was one of the most terrifying times of my life. I'd like to say it was the only one, but it wasn't. A few years later, when the kids were almost 6 and almost 4, panic attacks returned because I had a lot going on. We were building a house. My husband was traveling a lot and was very fearful of losing his job. He eventually did and fell into a very, very deep depression that he only now, 5 years later, is realizing the depth of. We had 2 kids under 6. And most of the time, I was basically raising them alone. My body was asking me to slow down. My mind was asking me to slow down. My soul was begging me to slow down. And I didn't listen. I was teaching, building a house, raising my kids, being all things to all people. I was Superwoman, and if you had anything to be done, give it to me and I'd be fine. Only I was living inside a glass tower, wearing this Superwoman cape and showing everybody how capable I was. And inside, I was crumbling. One day, I came out of teaching a yoga class and went to eat some takeaway fish. It was from a beautiful little trattoria. I went and sat in the sun and treated myself to this beautiful fish and steamed beans and rice and started having an allergic reaction. Within 45 minutes, I was in the emergency room, and I spent the night under observation because I'd had anaphylactic shock for the first time in my life. That was scary. And even though the next morning I walked out of the hospital physically fine, my mind was rattled. And even more so when I saw a doctor who told me that I probably had suddenly developed a midlife allergy that could potentially be fatal, and I needed to be careful of every single meal I ate because she wasn't sure of which of any of those things might be the cause of my reaction. Overnight, this changed the food that I ate. This changed my relationship to food that I've always loved and absolutely reveled in. I became terrified of eating anywhere. We stopped going out. Our holidays changed. We would only go to places that we could cook ourselves, and only if I knew for sure that there would be ingredients that were safe for me to eat. I was basically eating blanched chicken, carrots, and rice. That was it. It really wasn't working for me. And it took 6 months until I met another doctor who said to me that I had had food poisoning caused by a bacteria that goes onto fish. It's called scromboid syndrome. And bluefish often get this scromboid bacteria, and it causes a tremendous number of food poisoning cases every year. When he said this to me, I started to unclench, but my mind still wasn't okay. I cracked completely. It got to the point where my kids used to look at me when I was eating. Remember, they were just 4 and 6. And I would be eating, and suddenly one of them would go, Mommy, you're turning red. I had told them where the emergency numbers were. I had told them how to work the key to the front door if they needed to get help because my husband was most of the time away. They suddenly had this responsibility and this awareness of fear that what if something happened to Mommy? That was my biggest fear. What if something happened to me and then they were alone? It's taken a long time to heal from all of this, but like with Carolina's birth, when I learned that those waves
of terror would pass, I relearned again after the food poisoning. I realized that waves of panic attacks wouldn't actually kill me. And I realized that I was much stronger and much more fragile than I thought. I have wobbles once in a while. Before Christmas in 2018, I literally thought I was losing my mind. I actually told my husband that maybe we should send me to one of those clinics in the Alps where I could go and be psychologically monitored and treated, because I just couldn't feel motivated, interested in Christmas, in cooking, in anything. I was just not interested, which is very unlike me. It took me a few months, but I went to see my doctor and said to her, I actually think I'm losing my mind. I'm not okay. Not sleeping well, very anxious, very irritable, not kind to people around me that I love. I don't want this. I don't want this anymore. In that case, it was super simple. She ran some blood work, found out that I was really deeply anemic, deficient in a whole bunch of other vitamins and minerals. Within a couple weeks, I suddenly felt alive again. I was like a tulip who'd run out of water and suddenly was fed with water and a little bit of sugar, and I put my head up. The difference in my experience of life right now versus how it was for the last year in 2018, the whole of which I was probably very, very severely anemic, is like night and day. I know this. I trained as a yoga teacher. I've been interested in and studying health and wellness my whole life. And I didn't know. Not for lack of intelligence, not for lack of studying or reading, not for lack of interest. I just didn't know. This mental health game is no joke. We are fiercely smart, wildly capable, immensely accomplished, and very fragile beings. We need to talk about our fragility. Some of us do. Some of you come to me and talk about fragility because I guess in talking about it, I give you permission to do it too. But we also need to do something for ourselves and for others. So if you're listening to this and my story resonates with you, please reach out. You can reach out to me directly by email at Anne@mamafuel.me, or reach out to a friend, reach out to a carer, find a therapist, find an energy worker, find someone who can help you. Get your blood work done. Check if on a very biochemical level, your body has everything she needs. It's very possible that she doesn't. At the very least, it's worth checking and giving yourself the physical, biological, and chemical building blocks to give yourself the best chance for healthy life. I'd also recommend or share that your microbiome, so your gut health, has a huge impact on your mood and how you feel and experience life. This was the missing piece for me in the last few months. And if you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you'll have heard me talk about seeing a micronutritionist and how seeing her and changing the way that I eat, now with no sugar, no dairy, no gluten, none of a whole lot of other things for a long time, has also made a massive change. First came the vitamins and minerals. Second came the food change. And again, it's like I have a whole new level of lease on life. Way more energy, way more passion, way more interest, way more kindness for myself, my family, the people around me, curiosity, openness, optimism. And listening to me over this year, you might not have felt that those things were missing, but on a really deep level, they've been flagging more than a little. I feel like I'm back. And I'm back because my body is getting the attention that it needs and deserves. My mind is getting the support that it needs and deserves. And the food that I'm eating is no longer fighting against my mind trying to heal itself and my body trying to heal itself. I won't become evangelical about it, but it is definitely an avenue worth pursuing that I had never considered, despite, as I said, all of my reading, my interest, my curiosity, my contacts with shamans and naturopaths and doctors and nurses and chiropractors and massage therapists. It had never occurred to me. Last week being Mental Health Week is what has prompted me to share this with you. I won't lie, it feels vulnerable to share this experience and this conversation in this level of detail. I'm super grateful that my daughter, both of my daughters and I, but particularly my oldest daughter and I, have a beautiful relationship despite a very rocky start. As for my second daughter and I, we had the most incredible start where everything, or almost everything, that I had hoped to live with my first daughter, we were able to set up for my second. We had the skin-to-skin contact. We were together endlessly from the moment she was born. I think we might have been apart for 20 minutes, and that was it. And so that in itself was a healing experience that I'm very lucky to have had. We're good. I'm good. My family's good. We're very lucky. Not all mothers are so lucky. Not all mothers have incredible partners like I have who are loving and generous and kind. Not all mothers have the financial resources to investigate what's going on with their health. Not all mothers have someone that they feel they can talk to, that they can trust, that they can take the risk of being honest with. Not all mothers have access to information or technology or education that I have, that we have. Whatever your situation is, if this has resonated at all, please find somebody that you can talk to. And if that person turns out to not be the right person to talk to, keep looking. You deserve to be supported. If you know a mama who might need some support, please reach out to her. If you're one of the lucky mamas who has never had a mental health wobble, then, I'm so happy for you. It's amazing, because feeling good mentally it's another world. And it's a wonderful world that I'm delighted to inhabit most of the time, and humbled to have exited more than once in my maternal journey. I hope I won't go out into the fringes again of mental health, but I might. And if I do, I'll hopefully be aware enough to be able to ask for help a lot sooner. I decided last week to do something, not only to talk about what's going on or what has gone on for me, not only to open the conversation, but actually to invite some of us to gather. This is my carryover for Mental Health Week, and tomorrow, which is the 7th of May, 2019 at time of recording, we will be starting, I say we because it's me and a collection of mamas, we'll be beginning an experience where we are going to share time together, uplift each other, and be honest and true with what has been going on in our lives, and see how we can shift our perspective, acquire some tools to help us manage it a little bit better so that we can delight in our lives, show up joyfully, show up happily. I've decided to gather women who are feeling at the end of their tether. Starting on Tuesday, the 7th of May, I'm hosting a free online 5-day series of workshops for mamas who are running on fumes. Which, if you're trying to function as a mama who's doing all the things to all the people, if you have a job outside of home or a job inside of home plus the home jobs, and you're actually trying to be a decent human being in the process, this is for you. I know that anyone who attends the MamaFuel Up Sessions is going to leave them feeling brighter, more connected, and lighter, so that you can go out and live a better life. Make the right choices for you. Learn to be radically selfish so you can safeguard your mental and physical health. I believe so fiercely in this. I know that I am here to help mamas feel less alone. This week, we're going to gather virtually. And soon I'm going to start gathering us again physically. For those of you in Geneva, you'll be first. But I'm going to be traveling across Switzerland and into Canada and probably further beyond to gather mamas who are ready to have conversations and also to be active participants in improving how they experience this life. There's so much opportunity and so many things that we can do when we work together, when we uplift each other, when we celebrate and support each other. There's a sea change happening. Women are starting again to gather. Women are starting to support each other again in ways that may have been present in small pockets, but has been largely absent for many, many women as they were growing up and even into their adulthood. I know this through my own experience, and I also know this from talking to clients over the last 5 years of working in supporting mamas. If you, like me, want to make sure that there are no mamas left behind, I would love for you to join me and the other mamas who've already gathered for the MamaFuel Up Sessions. Joining is super easy. Go to www.mamafuel.me/MamaFuel Up. I'm just going to check that, but I know that's what it is. Yeah. MamaFuel.me/MamaFuel Up. You can also check my Instagram account that I will link to in the show notes, because if you click on the link in the bio, you can join there. And listen, if you're listening to this long after the time of recording, long after the 11th of May, which is the last day of our 5-day online MamaFuel Up workshops, get in touch with me. I'll see what I can do to hook you up with some of the tools and shifts in perspective that we exchange during this 5-day experience. If you do listen to this somewhere in the middle between the 7th and the 11th of May, come and join us. There will be replays. There's a pop-up Facebook group where we will be chatting with each other offline, off call really, not offline. And it's a really beautiful community of women who are just so ready to feel better and to be honest about the experience that they're having or that they've had. We really need to gather, mamas. We need to uplift each other and support each other. And I am so ready to create the space online and offline for you to do just that. I really hope you'll join me. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this episode particularly, which I'm sure to feel a little bit of vulnerability hangover, as Brene Brown calls it, after publishing. But this is too important for me to keep to myself, and it's too important a conversation not to have. So I'm pouring my heart out to you in hopes that it reaches you where you need to be reached, and in hopes that it encourages you to reach out to other people, either from a place of needing some support or from a place of supporting a mama who either looks like she needs it, or maybe even more importantly, the mamas who don't look like they need it at all. Because that was me, and I can assure you that if someone had tried to come close to me and help me, I probably would have crumbled into the help. So go out there and be brave, mamas. Reach out to each other, talk to each other, see each other, listen to each other. And if you get a chance, leave a comment, a review, and a rating on the podcast. This particular episode is one that I really, really want to share. And most of all, come and join us for the MamaFuel Up Sessions. We start on the 7th of May. We go till the 11th. This is 2019. And it's going to be an epic experience. It is the first time I'm gathering mamas this way online, but it is definitely not the last. I look forward to meeting you there. And if you haven't yet done it, make sure that you also hop into our online virtual village, which is a free Facebook group that's open all the time with going on 250 mamas from around the world supporting each other and being real about their experience. I'd love to see you in there. I'd love to continue this conversation in that group, because you may be listening once the MamaFuel sessions are over, and that is where the conversation will be continuing, is in the virtual village group. Once again, MamaFuel.me/MamaFuel Up to join us for the MamaFuel Up Sessions. We start the 7th of May. There will be recordings if you can't join us live, so come on in and bring some friends. It's time we shifted things up, ladies, and I, for one, cannot wait to meet you. Until then, have a fantastic week. Bye for now.
That's it for this episode of MamaFuel the podcast. Thanks for listening. There's a lot more conversation, sharing, and real mama talk happening in our private Facebook group. You can join that totally free by going to www.thecenteredmamaproject.com/Facebook, or just go to Facebook and type facebook.com/mamafuel.me, or just search mamafuel.me and you'll find us there. Make sure you say hi when you get in there. If you like this episode, or if you know a mama who could use a little bit of MamaFuel, I would love for you to share this episode and to rate it and leave a review. That will help us get this episode into more mamas' ears, and for that, I will be eternally grateful. Every comment helps, and it is always such a delight to hear from you. Thanks, and bye for now.